And certainly, ladies and gentlemen, when you're dealing with young people, whether, from infants to high school, be very, very careful that you don't mess them up. It's so easy to do. And a lot of the time it's inattention,
Mm.
I mean, it amazes me. We seem to have half the current generation on drugs. We didn't have that when I was a boy.
Yeah. So you're saying that's due to the inattention?
Partly, yeah.
Partly.
It may even be due to the lack of corporal punishment.
You're in favor of corporal punishment.
I am. Now, mind you.
Your dad didn't do that, though.
Oh, he sure did.
Oh, did he?
Oh, you better believe he did. But of course, and this is why I'm in favor of it, because my father used to say, never hit your kid when you're angry. It was very, very planned out, very intended. And the way he would do it, we'll see that his rules were very, very, very clear. We knew the kind of thing that would get us hit.
Hmm.
You see?
Right.
And then he'd count to 5. If we stopped, we didn't get hit.
Right.
But we went all the way to 5 and ignored him.
Wow.
Then what would happen is we would get a long lecture as to why we were going to be hit. And then he'd do the deed. Never used a belt, always used his hand. He had this weird snapping thing that was very unpleasant. And then he would give us a long lecture on why he'd done it. And you get to the point, beat me to a pole, man, but just stop. He can't take it anymore. But, so it wasn't common. It didn't happen a lot.
Right.
But it was sufficient to deter that kind of behavior. When his more liberal friends would say, "Oh, it's terrible, it's corporal punishment," he'd say, "Oh, it's not corporal punishment. It's catalyzing the cerebral cortex through pain association."
Wow.
Which, but I firmly believe that if corporal punishment was administered in that fashion to more kids, as a very balanced and very thought out part of a thought out disciplinary program. See, that's the thing. So many parents today don't look at parenting the way they do, say, at their jobs or their professions. Parenting, fathering or mothering, is not just something you do.
Right.
It's the most important thing you are charged with. There is nothing you've got going on that is more important than your kids. But having said that, it doesn't mean you spoil them, it doesn't mean they get everything they want. It means you spend a lot of time with them. It means you sometimes have to sacrifice your own interests to them. I mean, it's like when parents ask me, should I let my kid read Harry Potter? Or this or that or whatever. I say, read it yourself. And
That's hard, though.
I know.
God,
To read.
Maybe read a couple reviews on Amazon and see what other people are saying.
Yeah, maybe that. Maybe make up our mind from people who don't even know as much as I do. No. You read the thing yourself. Or don't pretend you care. I mean, my father, when my brother and my son would get interested in a series of books, he would read out the whole series. But he'd read 1 or 2.
Right.
And then he'd give us the go-ahead or not. And he was the sort of fellow we could discuss these things with. And he sometimes would get an interest in the book himself and throw it back and forth with us.
Cool.
Well, I mean, he was of the opinion that his sons had brains, and that the brain is like a muscle, and it gets exercised by use. But see, because he knew that he and mother were our primary educators, above and beyond the school, this too was part of his job. I mean, he said it once, he said it 1,000 times, that one of the most important things to be judged on, he believed, by God, was how good a father he had been. And that is the seriousness with which people have to take being a father or a mother.
Right. Okay, let me take it back a little bit to the corporal punishment thing. And let me ask you a question, because you seem to suggest that, okay, so your father had this whole elongated routine. And you just said, just beat me up, old man, but let's get on with it. So, or something akin to that. So if the corporal punishment wasn't really the part you minded, couldn't he have done away with it if it wasn't the effective part?
No, because it was the centerpiece.
It was the centerpiece.
And it wasn't fun, it was degrading. You didn't like it.
Of course.
You didn't enjoy it. And to be honest with you, it was kind of obvious he didn't enjoy it. And that's what impressed you. The fact that he was willing to do it much as he disliked it. And that impressed upon you the seriousness of the offense.
Interesting.
But as I say, we had a very explicit set of rules we lived under.
Yeah.
When I say explicit, I don't mean there were a ton of them, because there weren't. And in some ways, my father was extremely, people today would consider him very laissez-faire. I mean, we stayed out and stayed up later than most of our schoolmates. He had very there were very adult areas that we could talk about with him that probably most parents would not. But part of that was the time and the place, Hollywood in the 60s.
Wow.
Things would come up. But that was the thing, He always made it clear that there wasn't anything we couldn't talk to him about. But that went in with his whole belief that this was his most important job. Everything else, his acting before and his engineering after and everything in between, was secondary to raising us and dependent upon raising us. And that, I'll just say parenthetically, for a lot of you folks out there, one gets the impression that a good chunk of young people today have done very poorly in the father department. I cannot tell you how unhappy that makes me, because so much of who and what I am came to me because of the father I had. All I can tell you is that you've really got to try to fix in your head what the ideal of fatherhood is, and if, as and when God blesses you with that role, try to do better than whatever you were given. Now, for a lot of people today, there's no pattern. I get that. I understand that. But you have to try, because the alternative is to create another generation of kids as screwed up as the last several have been. That we don't need more of that, Even if everyone listening here, there's 700 people eventually watch this program. I don't know. If only 7 of them turned out to be decent fathers and produce kids who are upright and courageous and moral and fun, and then I'll have done my job. It's the great tragedy, really, of our day that is in with and under all the others, is the death of fatherhood, the death of motherhood, the death of masculinity, the death of femininity. That is intimately linked to every one of our other problems. And again, as you get into a chicken and egg deal, but they're all intimately connected. And this is one area, ladies and gentlemen, where you can say, not me, not this kid. The rest of it I can't control, but this I can.
Indeed. Shameless plug again, because you're talking largely about fatherhood, but we have 2 books by Solange Hertz, Searcher of Majesty and Women, Words, and Wisdom, which largely deal with almost the exact same thing you said, but applied to moms.
Yeah.
How there shouldn't be this thing, housewives need to get out. The housewife is one of the most important things you can do as a kid. And so she makes this case for authentic femininity. What is that? She says, one of my favorite lines, she says, you can't just be the executive boss, to your kid. You can't just be the Latin scholar part of your kid. You have to be all things to him. And that's why you need to know all things. You need to be able to come up with, to answer all these weird sorts of questions. You need to be everything for him. Perhaps you yourself may not be a saint, but if you raise a saint, that's just as good. Job well done.
Yeah, and the thing too to bear in mind is that, as my father used to say, there are several stages in a kid's development. For a boy, from 1 to about 5 or 6, he's mama's boy.
Right.
But then, for about 5 or 6 to perhaps 10 or 11 or 12, he's dad's kid. And then, from that time on, begins the period of discovery, of finding out what the world is about, meeting other people, dealing with other things. Basically, your parents have armored you with what you're going to get from them by the time you're 14 or 15. And again, when I say your first your mom's and your dad's, that obviously is not there's no complete separation or break. And I presume too that with girls, it's a bit different in the sense that they have a very different relationship from their fathers and their mothers than boys do. But nevertheless, you need them both.
Right.
See, that's another great evil lie of our society, that you don't need both parents. You do, and you need them both pulling 100% to do their job with the children and do their job with each other. That's why the sacrament of marriage is so important. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, when you're looking for a spouse, there's several things you got to keep in mind. And we'll put aside buying one in the slave market of Tangier, as I suggested earlier.
Of course, yeah.
Although several people asked for the address, as I recall, but never mind. The thing is that you need a spouse who shares your vision. You need, if you're a guy, to be established on the road that you're going to be doing. I don't even got to be the head of a company, but you need to have pretty much figured out the profession you're going to be pursuing. You need to have money coming in. Nothing destroys marriages, even amongst good Catholics, more than monetary problems. So you got to get that settled out. You got to know how to manage money. None of these are romantic, ladies and gentlemen. They're not romantic, I know. And I would not want to denigrate the role of romance either. I really would not. The problem is everybody knows that part, but they don't know the nuts and bolts. Again, quoting my late father, he used to say, people know how to get married, but they don't know how to be married. And that's something to think about.